Okay, well, hey, this is Wes Bewley, and I'm joining you from Austin, Texas. And today, what we're going to do is talk about the difference between a 401k or a Roth IRA and something called a fixed index annuity. So, what I'm going to do is share my screen with you, and we're going to kind of dive in here and just kind of look at the differences. Maybe at this point, you've heard about a fixed index annuity. Maybe you haven't, but today is going to be very, very enlightening for you. And you're going to have just a lot, I think, a lot of excitement about your investing future. Now, the thing about annuities, it's funny. If you went and Googled what is the disadvantage of an annuity right now, actually, I did this for the purpose of this short demo here. And literally, Google says annuities offer benefits like a steady income in retirement and tax deferred growth with no annual contribution limits. However, they can come with high annual fees, early withdrawal penalties, and may not provide inheritance for heirs. Okay. This is not good, right? I would 100% agree with that. And the thing that's dangerous about Google is that what it's referring to is something called a variable annuity. And the way you can remember a variable annuity is variable annuities are very bad. All right. And so we're not going to be talking about a variable annuity today. I don't recommend variable annuities. And what we're actually going to be talking about is something called a fixed indexed annuity, and also known as FIA. I absolutely love fixed index annuities, and I'm going to spell it all out for you today. So let's first talk about what they're not. They're not life only or variable annuities. Okay. They have nothing to do with those two types of annuities. You're not foregoing principal with a fixed indexed annuity, and they're not expensive. Okay. The benefits are that they can only go up. So, what a fixed indexed annuity means is you have a 0% floor. So, no matter what the market does or doesn't do, you cannot lose whatever floor you reach. So, if, let's say you invest 200,000, it goes up to 212. Well, you're not going to go below 212 again. Does this make sense? So, a 0% floor is really exciting. Plus, you also have growth and upside potential, which we'll show, and I'll kind of show you the history of some of these. You can lock in your growth. These are short term. You have liquidity and access, which gives you control. And they can also be a long term investment play. What we like for you, though, and what we're going to really highlight today is that there's low or no annual fees on fixed indexed annuities. You can eliminate the expenses of an advisor, and I'll kind of go into that. It's going to blow you away. And then, you also have principal protection and death benefit. And wait till you see how the death benefit works on these as well. So let's examine what fees do to your account if you were to just leave money in the market with Edward Jones or Merrill Lynch or Charles Schwab or any of those companies or any other financial advisor. If you're just in the market, we're going to look at how those fees work out. And then we're also going to show you how the market actually performs. So if you can see my screen right now, what I have is historical returns of the S&P 500. Now, this is not what we do, but this is just the historical returns of the market. And, I didn't get these from Bob at the insurance office. I basically just went straight to Google, and these are the numbers that it will provide you. So I want you to see what happens if you leave your money where it is in a 401k or a traditional Roth IRA or something like that. Anything that's currently being managed and is fully in the market and can be exposed to the market, I want you to see what happens. And I want you to see what it's done in the past, because that tells us what it's likely to do in the future. History always repeats itself. So I just took the actual returns, and if you Google historical returns of the S&P 500, this is what it pops out with. So you can see it shows red for the down years, and you can see it shows green for the up years, pretty simple stuff. And if you average it all out, you can see it's 6.7%. So not 10%, not 15% like you hear sometimes, not even 8%, right? The historical returns of the S&P 500 are 6.7% if we look at the past 23 years. But I want you to imagine the returns we could generate if we could eliminate these red years, okay? And one of the value propositions of a fixed indexed annuity is that we can actually eliminate these red years. We can eliminate those years of loss where you never have to experience them again, and they never affect your investment portfolio again. So I just took an example. If someone was to roll over a $200,000 401k, what could happen? Well, where the 401k currently sits, if history repeats itself, you can see it goes from 200,000 to 649,000 in 23 years. So you've tripled your money. Nobody would argue that that's exciting, right? I certainly wouldn't. That's really not bad. But what I want you to look at is look how many years when it went, when it was 200,000 started out, it immediately drops to 179,000 because the market took a 10% hit that year. And then the second year, it drops to 156,000 because the market took a 13% nosedive that year. And then all the way down to 119. I mean, you've almost lost 50% of your investment at this point. And look at this. It takes 13 years all the way to 2013 before you get back to ground zero again. 13 years. So if you're getting ready to retire, you don't want your account to be held hostage waiting for the market to return, right? You want to be able to use it. And in this scenario, though, these people that were getting ready to retire during this time frame were in some really big trouble. So value proposition number one of a fixed index annuity is that we can eliminate these negative years, okay? And two things I want to tell you on this slide, though, real quick. Number one, some people would say, well, Wes, my guy or my girl actually beats the S&P 500. He or she does much better than the market. And that may be, but it's also important to know that less than 10% actually beat the market. So do you have a 10 percenter? I'm not here to tell you you do or you don't. But what I am here to ask you is why even run the risk? Why even get on the roller coaster of wondering if you have a 10 percenter? The second thing to look at is just from a market standpoint, the market averages a major correction, which means more than 30% every 7 to 8 years. So you can see here's one from 2000 to 2002. This was a major correction because it exceeded 30%. And then you can see there's another one here in 2008 where the market lost 38% that year. Now, there really hasn't been a major market correction since 2008. So historically speaking, I would say we're due for one. We're due for another big correction, right? So let's move on. But value proposition number one with a fixed index annuity, we can contractually guarantee that you never have these negative years again. But this chart isn't even the truth because this is assuming that you are managing your money for free. This chart is assuming that you're doing all the work on TD Ameritrade, something like that, doing all the work yourself, which we know is probably not what most of us are doing, right? So now I'm going to show you reality. So what I did is I took all the numbers from the market averages and I just added a second form here to put in the fees of a money manager. So what someone would charge you in fees to manage your investable portfolio. And I just used a 1.5% management fee. And then typically they'll charge you another 0.5% to move your funds around. So look what happens. Your 200K grows to 649,000 over here, right? So best case scenario, your fees are 1.5%. And, that's small, right? No big deal because, that's what they'll tell you. So look what happens when your 200K grows to 649, but we add in that little tiny 1.5% fee. For every year that it's managed, it only reaches 467,000. Oftentimes I'll hear someone say, well, my financial advisor is a family friend. I've known him since school or grade school, right? And I'm thinking, man, that's an expensive friend. Normally would be 649, but because my best friend manages my account for me, it's only 467. I hope that's a really, really good friend, because they're obviously very, very expensive. So literally that 1.5% fee cost you somewhere in the ballpark of 170 grand just in 23 years. So when a financial advisor tells me, just set it and forget it, it'll come back. That might be true. The question is when? And I would also argue that they have about 170 to 180,000 reasons to tell you that. So the last thing I want to talk to you about with these charts is this. You have 13 years here with no growth, 13. So if you're getting ready to retire and you're going to use your money, you're in your kind of go-go years, but psychologically, you don't want to take money out when the account is down, right? So we want to eliminate that financial and emotional roller coaster, which we can do. The other thing we're going to eliminate or severely reduce is that 1.5% management fee. There's no need for a fee unless you're getting some type of enhanced death benefits or maybe you're getting some type of home health care, then the fee might actually be worth it. But a management fee from a financial firm that's uploading your money into a category of conservative, moderate, or risky, that's not somebody managing my money and looking at it every day and making changes based upon what the market's doing, right? So value proposition number one, we're going to get rid of those negative years. And value proposition number two, I'll show you this fixed index annuity in a second, and you're not going to be paying any fees at all. That probably sounds a whole lot better, right? Okay, so before we do that, I want you to write down two numbers for me, okay? I want you to write down 23 years, and then let's go ahead and round this up to 468,000, just so we're doing easy math. So 468,000 is where you would be after 23 years, okay? If we just went out 20 years, so we'll do 2020 right here, you'd be at roughly 375,000. Now, let's keep going on here and I'll show you the next slide, but on the left, you're making 6.7% historically, and on the right, you're making 5.2% because of fees. Remember that. So what if we only made 5% in kind of a tortoise beats the hare mentality? If all you made was 5% every single year, okay? That's what this chart represents. If you never took any losses, if you just made only 5% every single year, what's the outcome? So instead of this roller coaster of up and down, now you're just on the slow, steady, nothing crazy. There's not a 20% gain, and there's also not a 10% loss, just 5% straight up every single year. So check this out. You'd actually be money ahead compared to where you would be if you were managing it yourself. If you compare 2020 and 2020 here, and this doesn't even come close when you factor in management fees. So now let me show you, since we're on the same page here, what the markets do. They don't average 12%. They don't average 15% or 8%. I'm showing you right here, it's 6.7% if you're managing it. But if you're paying someone else, it's 5.2%. And after 23 years, your money's worth roughly 468,000. I would recommend that you get off the roller coaster. Here's just one company, and there's tons of companies, but Emeritus is one of the companies that we write fixed index annuities with, along with infinite banking style life insurance policies. And these guys are an A++ rated company. And when you see this number here, this big 7 right here, what this simply means is that this is how long there's a surrender charge or a fee to move your money to a different location. Or in some cases, if I take too much money out in a single year, that can also trigger a fee. But whether this was a 5 or a 10 or a 7 or a 15, that's all the numbers mean, is this is how long there's a surrender charge. And I'll show you what I mean by that in more clarity here shortly. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to page 3, okay? And you'll have something very similar to this. I just, literally made up a name, John McLovin from the movie Superbad, and, started it off with 200,000, assuming he was rolling over 200,000 from a 401k. So let's go down to slide number 3 here, and we get to something called allocations, all right? So you can see here where I put 40% into one, 20% into another, 30% into one, 10% into another, right? So allocations, these are different indexes that we're allowed to follow and get the returns of these indexes. So notice how I put 40% into one, 20% into another, 30% over here, 10% over here, right? Now, some people in my industry will put 100% of the index into the one that pays the most. And why would they do that? Well, they want to show you a hope and a dream, right? So on 200K, I put 40% or $80,000 into a fixed account that's just going to earn 4.5%. If the market's up 22.5%, this is what it's doing. If the market's down 11%, it's still going to get 4.5%. So I put 40% there because that's pretty conservative. Then you can see here I put 20% into the S&P 500, but notice it caps at 8.85%. So if the S&P was at 13%, you'd get 8.85%. And the insurance company would keep the spread because that's how they make money. And then I put 30% into the S&P sector rotator. But look here, it's not capped, right? Instead, it uses something called a participation rate, which is 170%. Participation rates mean that you're participating at 170% of the gain. So you get 170% of whatever this goes up to. So if it goes up to $10 a share, then you're going to get $17 because that would be 170%. So you actually get more if the investment goes up on this one. And then in this illustration, we put 10% of your money into the Russell index. And, the Russell index is kind of like the grandfather of all S&P indexes. It's been around forever, kind of like your steady Eddie. Okay, so here's what's cool on the next page. This is page 4 that we're on now. So this shows you an aggregate summary. An aggregate simply means the aggregate of the sectors that I just showed you. So starting with the middle, the lowest 10-year period right here, and then the best 10-year period. So let's start with the best, which was 9.91%. And I want to start there because I don't want you to plan on 9.1% because I want to under promise and over deliver with you. The last 10 years did 6.51%, which, if you remember what the market did, if you were paying a fee, the market did 5.2%. So this actually beat the market. And then the lowest 10 years we're going to look at is right here, which is a 6.21%. This is the worst it's ever done. And there's not a fee coming out of that either. So it's a true 6.21%. Now, could it be worse than that? Sure, it could. But let's just say, even if it did 6%, or even if it did 5.9%, you're still beating or keeping up with the market. And yet now you have zero downside risk. Okay, now let's keep going down here. It's starting to get juicy. Now, the next screen looks identical, but it's not. These are the individual investments or allocations that I chose. So there's going to be a few different screens that look like this. They're going to look the same, but they're not. And where they're different is right here, where it tells you the type of index that it is. So this is the S&P 1 year point to point. Notice the worst it ever did. It actually shows you the date range from '07 to 2016. This is the lowest period it's ever had. So you can see year one, it did about 3.5%, and your money rose from 40,000 to 41,412. But then in year two, which would have been 2008, if we're looking at this historical marker here, what happened? Well, the market crashed. But notice what didn't happen. Your account balance didn't go down. Your account balance stayed exactly the same. This is one of the most exciting things about an annuity is you never lose your floor again. So you don't have to stay up late at night worrying about the market or watch CNN and worry about trends that you're seeing in the stock market. None of that matters to you anymore because you have a contractual guarantee that you can't lose your floor. So remember, I only had 20% of your money in here, and we started off with 40,000. And then that first year, again, you did 3.5%, and the money rose to 41,412. And then in year two, the market crashed and the market went negative 38.49. But remember, value proposition number one is our clients don't lose any money. So in this particular year, you didn't take an L. You just stayed at zero for that year. So you didn't get any interest because the index was down, but look at your accumulation value. It stayed exactly the same. You never lost $1, while most people who had 401ks and traditional Roths at that time saw almost a 40% hit. And real quick, let me just show you this 38.49%. So if we come back over here, true historical S&P 500 in 2008, it was a 38.49% loss. And I just want to show you that so that you know I'm not changing it to make it look better or worse. I'm just showing you it's the same thing, except our clients didn't lose 38.49% of their money. So what would your account look like if you didn't take that drop? That's one of the value propositions of this. The worst this investment's ever returned is 5.64%. That's the worst. Then if we go down to the next one here, this is one of the top 5 in the S&P, and it's called the sector rotator. The worst it's ever done is 7.05%. Now look here, you had 3 years that did zero, right here, right here, and right here. You also had 1 year that did 1%, right? But you also had years that did 14%, 24%, 17%. So the point is, wouldn't it be great not to lose like right here, but then the following year to be able to earn 14% and 24%? You see what I'm saying? Like, that'd be incredible. That's why we need to move your money here. Now, if we look at this next one, this one's called the Russell. And like I mentioned, this is kind of like the grandfather. The worst it's ever done is 4.6%. And that's the worst it's ever done, So just a nice, easy, steady income coming off this investment. Now we're going to get to the last 2 pages of this, and this could be the most important. So we'll start on the left. This shows you the policy year, and this is how long you've had it. We show putting in a $200,000 premium, and we're not ever putting in more money because we're just moving 200,000 over into a fixed index annuity. So right here, you can see the accumulation value. This is how much money your account is worth. So check this out. At year 10, we're at $350,000. Well, let's go back and look at the market at year 20. you're at 375,000. So we're only a little bit behind, even though it's just been 10 years. But here, after 20 years, you're at 592,000. And people ask me all the time, well, Wes, how's this possible? Well, it's easy. Number one, we didn't take any of those negative years. You never had a negative year, right? And if you go to interest credited and look on year two, if you do some math on this guy, this was 3,762. This was a bad year for this index. And the reason why is because if you do 4.5% on $80,000, you're going to get about $3,600, right? So it's about 4.5%. But then if you fast forward to the next year, you had 18,855 and 28,323 in growth. So that's one reason we can beat or keep up with the market while not having any downside potential. The other reason is we're not paying $180,000 in fees. You know, I mean, that's kind of people say, how do you do it? Well, step one, get rid of these crazy fees, like let's do that first. But then if you also simultaneously remove the downside, and now you're starting to see like, why in the world is everyone not doing this? Well, they just don't know. There's no one putting out education like this that teaches them and actually shows them the real numbers. So I'm glad you're actually getting to see this. So if you just add 180 to this, well, of course it's doing a lot better, right? It's those fees that are just gobbling people up. But we're not taking it out here because we're not wasting any money on fees. So the other thing I want you to look at is something called the surrender value right here. And let's spend some time here and talk about this because this could be one potential drawback to a fixed indexed annuity that some people could have. I don't think this is a drawback for you, but this is a 7-year annuity. Remember, I said at the beginning this was 7 years. So if we look at the accumulation value column and we look at the surrender value column, notice at the start of year 8, these numbers are identical. 329,511 and 329,511. But before that, they're not. So this means at the end of year 1, your account has grown to 212,000, but your surrender value is 193,000. So if you look here at year 1, let's say you wake up and you're like, I want to move this all to Wells Fargo. Well, you're not going to be able to move this full accumulation value because this is a 7-year annuity. So it's actually going to cost you about $6,500 to move it early because you have a 7-year annuity, right? If you go to year 2, you can see where your accumulation value is 216. Well, now if you want to move it to Merrill Lynch or somewhere else, you're looking at a $1,500 fee. But look at year 3, you're actually coming out $18,000 ahead on this rollover. And again, you had no market risk and you paid no management fees. But after 7 years, this is completely gone because after 7 years, your accumulated value and your surrender values match. So what I want you to do now is write down 10%, okay? And here's the cool thing about these fixed index annuities. For your first 7 years, you can borrow up to 10% without any fees. So right here, if I wanted to take out 21,000, I could do that without any fees on the account. Now you still have to pay ordinary income tax on that. We can't change that, but you can take out up to 10% with no fees. Now that's not to say that you can't take out 15% or more than that, because you can. And we're going to do some math here in a second because I want to put those fees into perspective for you. Now, notice on year 10, your account has grown to $350,000. But if we pan to the right and look at the death benefit, you can see your death benefit's actually $365,000. So it's roughly $15,000 more. And that's because this has a little bit of an enhanced death benefit, meaning that the death benefit is just a little bit bigger than the account value. But over time, if you look at year 23, I mean, that death benefit's almost $50,000 higher. So sometimes people have a great pension or Social Security and they don't have to touch this, but all the while they're getting this enhanced death benefit and there's no charge for it. Okay, so let me talk about one more thing on the death benefit. Let's say year 1, someone walks outside and unfortunately they get hit by a bus, all right? Your account value is $212,000 and your death benefit is the entire amount. So you don't pay a penalty or surrender charge or anything like that if a person was to die in the first or any years with the fixed index annuity. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. You can see the growth. It's keeping up or beating the market. You never have any negatives. You have access to your money the whole time, so you have no risk of losing money. You've got upside potential for big years like here and here and here, right? But we do give up a little bit of liquidity for the first 7 years. But let me show you something in closing just to put this into full context. Let's say year 5, You come down here to year 5 and you're at $267,000. And let's say you want to withdraw $50,000. You need $50,000 for some reason, okay? What I want to show you is something called the surrender charge schedule. So if we were to take out more than 10%, the first 10% is free, remember that. But if we were to take out more than 10%, or if you were to cash out this entire thing, whatever year you did that in, this is the fee or the charge that they would charge you in the year that you did that. So if we come back over here to year 5, we've got $267,000 and we want to borrow 50,000. So that means the first, let's say roughly 26,000 is free because I just took 10% of 260,000. Really, I could say the first 26,700 is free, right? But let's just make even math here. So let's say the first 26,000 is free. So if we take 50,000 minus 26,000, we're going to have $24,000, right? Let's figure out what kind of fees we would pay on that 24,000 remaining. So if we come back down here to our schedule, year 5 is 6%. So we take 24,000 times 0.06. That equals $1,440, okay? That's the fee that we're going to pay for pulling out more than 10% in year 5. Now, look, I don't like the surrender charge. I don't like 6%. 6% sounds horrible, but let's put this into perspective. So remember, you only owe 6% on anything above the first 10% that you take out. So the first 10% is $26,000, so that's free, okay? The next 20% was $24,000, and we pay a 6% fee on that, which is $1,440. So if you write that down, $1,440 that we use for this example, I don't like $1,440, but let me show you how that's really not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things here. So remember when we were on the S&P 500, they're charging a fee of 1.5% every year on this value point right here. So as this number goes up, that 1.5% stays the same, but it's bigger because it's a bigger number that they're taking that 1.5% from. So let's just say for easy math here that your $200,000 was in the market and it never grew. So if you're paying a 1.5% fee on this every year, that's $3,000, right? So $3,000 the first year, $3,000 the second year, $3,000 the third, the fourth, and the fifth. That's $15,000 in fees just to house your money with a financial advisor. That's crazy. $15,000 and you didn't even want to use it? And when you lost money, they still took their 1.5% fee? $15,000 just for the privilege of leaving your money there. But here, you don't pay a fee. But we did use the example of taking out $50,000 and we didn't pay any fees on the first 10%, which was $26,000, and that left an additional $24,000. So we paid 6% on that $22K, and that meant we paid a $1,440 fee. My point in showing you this is that the surrender schedule is not a big deal, but you need to know about it because it's there. But when we put into context the fees that you're already paying, it's really not that big of a deal. So in closing, to not move your money here, I think it'd be kind of crazy because you're getting rid of all the risk. You're getting rid of all the anxiety, all the nights that you can't sleep, all the nights wondering what if the market crashes and thinking like, oh my gosh, I've worked so hard for this retirement. You're getting an ironclad contractual guarantee that your financial floor never goes down. You're also getting all of that upside potential, just like you have in the market now. We have upside potential too in this fixed index annuity, which you saw from that one index that had 170% participation rate. And you're also no longer wasting money on management fees. To me, this is a no-brainer when you look at it, and I think you should move your money. That's my recommendation. And I hope you take into consideration what I've shared with you because this thing is a home run. And I think you'll absolutely love this fixed index annuity if you're someone who wants to get your money out of the market, get rid of all these expensive management fees, have a guaranteed floor, gain all that peace of mind, still be able to have access to it. You see what I'm saying? So if this is something that you'd like to get started with, what you can do is follow the directions below this video. And what we'll do is run an illustration just like the one that you saw, only it'll be specific to your scenario. And then from there, if it's something that you want to go ahead and roll your money over to a fixed index annuity, then what we do is literally file a real simple form and we'll take care of all the heavy lifting. There's no work or stress on your end, and we'll go from there. So look forward to working with you. If this presentation has made total sense, we'll talk to you soon.